Right, welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Let's take you back to one of the lead stories we're running for you this evening as Zimbabwe gears up to host the 44th Ordinary SADC Summit of Heads of State and Government. South Africa says it has no authority to move the gathering from Harare. Some political parties have called on Zimbabwe not to host the gathering. Let's bring in senior research fellow and director at Africa-Asia Dialogues, Thembisa Fakude, who joins us for more on this. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. Mr. Fakude, thank you for being with us this evening. South Africa says it has no authority to move the gathering from Harare. What should we make of this? Is it entirely accurate?
Well, it's not entirely accurate, but I think South Africa's history with Zimbabwe has always indicated that, I mean, from the time of President Thabo Mbeki indicating that quite diplomacy, and we see that occurring and continuing, with South Africa refusing to take a tougher stance. One doesn't know why. On Zimbabwe, notwithstanding, Zimbabwe continues, of course, to embarrass South Africa when it comes to these matters. South Africa insists on taking a softer stance in Zimbabwe. Even this time around, we see South Africa not only flip-flopping, but refusing to take a tougher stance, notwithstanding the wrong politicking that we see in that country.
So what kind of political dynamic does this create this time around? Because what's being thrust into the spotlight is the issue of Zimbabwe's human rights abuses.
Well, it's going to be difficult to move forward. I mean, one would have expected that the new 7th administration will be much more tough on Zimbabwe, but obviously they're following the same position they've been following on over the past. So I don't see any imprint move henceforth, except that South Africa, of course, continue to tell us behind the scene that if the situation deteriorates in Zimbabwe and South Africa becomes irresponsible in inverted commas towards Zimbabwe, you might just see the influx of Zimbabwe. So that's one concern that they have, that it's better for them to deal with Zimbabwe the way they've been dealing with it, because in that manner it kind of helps to maintain calm, because if there was going to be any careless move towards Zimbabwe, you might just see an influx of Zimbabweans coming into this country. So they continue wanting to insist that there is stability and the political challenges that we face in this country can be solved. But the Zimbabwean human rights activists and the opposition in Zimbabwe, of course, see this differently, and they see South Africa to being part and parcel of this problem.
How much substance does such a call come with if we have to look at Zimbabwe's track record when it comes to violation of human rights, and when we also put under the spotlight the issues of illegal detentions and tortures and all the stories we keep hearing surfacing and building up on the ground, and the kind of treatment for those who are incarcerated?
Well, Zimbabwe is not serious in terms of its political act in solving the problems. I mean, they go around the world spending money, telling the world that Zimbabwe is open for business, but what's happening at home is totally contrary to the rhetoric that we see them repeating over and over again in international platforms. President Mnangagwa, when he came into power, he promised that things were going to be different, but nothing has changed. And I think the Zimbabwean people expect South Africa to act a little bit much more tougher this time around, because it's actually quite embarrassing that we're going to have a South Africa that continually supports Zimbabwe, and overseas and in other international matters, South Africa has been very aggressive in terms of taking a tougher position. So Zimbabweans expect something different from South Africa, and one hopes, of course, that behind the scene moves are afoot that seeks to speak sense to Zimbabwe government that continues, as you correctly put it, jailing its own people and continuing with suppression of human rights and basic human rights, suppressing freedom of expression and all the kind of things that we enjoy in this country. But we don't seem to be condemning. Instead, we continue with that quiet diplomacy that was instituted by Thabo Mbeki till now. Nothing has really changed. We have not been seen to be taking a tougher stance in Zimbabwe.
What kind of message do you think that conveys to the rest of the world? You mentioned former President Thabo Mbeki's negotiation or supposed negotiation at the time, but if we already in 2024 And the whole world is already saying, you know, wait a minute, look at how Zimbabwe is treating Zimbabweans when it comes to human rights violations. What does it send internationally, the kind of message about South Africa and South Africa's efforts towards curbing human rights violations, irrespective of what happens here at home?
I think South Africa will have to is going to find itself in a much more embarrassing position, because our foreign policy is quite brave and gallant. If you look around the world and position that we've taken, whether it's Cuba, Western Sahara, Palestine, and others, we've been very firm in terms of condemning the human rights violation and pushing for the aspirations of the people of those countries for their rights. And here we are, next door, we are taking a much more lighter position, flip-flopping on even uttering a word of condemnation, because what we see happening in Zimbabwe is certainly a country that doesn't really care about human rights, and it will continue doing so because there's no pressure. And one country that can actually exert that pressure for Zimbabwe to stop abusing its people and violating its people's rights is South Africa. But South Africa, that position. Instead, we're flip-flopping and continuing dealing with the government of Zimbabwe with kids' gloves, notwithstanding that we see on television on a daily basis and we see on social media on a daily basis how human rights violations continue to take place in the country.
What does hosting this gathering mean for Zimbabwe?
Well, it's a stamp of approval. It's a stamp of that these other countries agree with what's happening in Zimbabwe, and it's a slap in the face of the opposition and human rights activists who've been, at least the best that these countries could have done is to cancel the current or what's going to be taking place in Zimbabwe. So it means a lot for the Zimbabwean government. It means that their colleagues in SADC agree with them. It means that their colleagues in SADC don't see anything wrong at the moment in Zimbabwe in terms of politics and suppression of basic human rights, and it will embolden them to continue doing as they please.
Very well. Thank you so much for weighing in on this discussion. We leave it there for now, but it's a discussion that does continue. That was Senior Research Fellow and Director at Africa-Asia Dialogues at Thembisa Fakude.